My name is Dana Mitchell. I'm 32 years old, and last year I did the one thing nobody in my family thought I could do on my own. I bought a little half of a rundown duplex in East Austin and turned it into my home. Apparently, that was my first mistake. A few weeks ago, I was standing in my own living room, staring at my dad across the coffee table while he calmly told me I should hand my house over to my brother. Not lend him a room. Not let him crash on the couch. Literally give him my home. He sat there like he was discussing the weather. "You know this place is too much for you," he said. "Your brother deserves a real shot. You can always rent somewhere smaller." I laughed at first because I genuinely thought he was joking. I work full-time, I made every single mortgage payment, I painted these walls myself, and my dad acted like I had just been keeping my brother's property warm for him. When I said no, his whole face changed. "You're being selfish," he snapped. "He has more responsibilities than you do. He deserves this. And if you won't do the right thing, don't expect to see anything from me when I'm gone. I will cut you out of my will." That was the moment something in me stopped caring about being the good daughter. I walked to the hallway closet, reached up to the top shelf, and pulled down a folder I had kept for years, just in case I ever needed a reminder of how uneven things really were. I wasn't planning to remind myself. I was planning to show my dad. Before I tell you what was in that folder and how it blew my family apart, I want to hear from you. Would you ever give up a house you paid for because your family deserves it more? Tell me what you'd do in the comments, and if you like stories like this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss how this mess ends. When I slid that folder across the coffee table, the air in my living room shifted. It was the first time I had ever laid my father's favoritism out in front of him instead of swallowing it and pretending it did not exist. Inside were printouts and notes I had collected for years. A copy of the listing for the first house my dad, Raymond, bought for my older brother, Brandon, and an estimate of what they sold it for when he decided he was too young to stay put. Screenshots of bank transfers where my parents sent him tens of thousands of dollars for business ideas, emergencies, and debts. Every page reminded me how often I had been told to figure things out alone while he was handed another safety net. Watching my dad skim those pages felt unreal. For once, he could not dismiss my point as me being sensitive. The numbers were there in black and white. He had to see that, on paper, Brandon had already received more from him and my mom than I would ever see from any inheritance he liked to wave around. It did not make him back down. It just pushed his anger deeper. Brandon barely looked at the paperwork. He never enjoyed facing consequences, even when they were written out line by line. His attention stayed fixed on me, heavy with that mix of entitlement and resentment I had grown up around, as if he were still the one who deserved to be rescued no matter how many chances he wasted. When they finally left that night, my duplex felt different. I had painted every wall and chosen every piece of furniture, yet I walked from room to room with a dull buzzing in my chest, wondering if I had just shattered the fragile piece of family I had left over a stack of documents and a single word. No. It was hard not to ask myself if I could have softened it, if I should have stayed quiet one more time. That thought made me furious with myself. I had spent years watching Raymond show up for Brandon in ways he never even considered for me. Tuition help when my brother changed majors again. Money for a truck he immediately traded up for something flashier. Checks mailed whenever a bill came due that he could not cover. Each time I told myself it was not worth a fight, that being the independent one meant never expecting anything. Standing alone in my kitchen, I finally saw how that label had turned into a cage. Independent had slowly become overlooked. Responsible had become convenient. It was easier for everyone if I kept being the daughter who did not ask for anything, while Brandon stayed the son who always needed to be saved. In the days that followed, the silence from my parents' side of town felt heavier than any argument. No texts, no calls, no awkward attempts to smooth things over. I went to work, answered emails, sat through meetings, and carried that silence with me, along with a growing sense that something was moving behind the scenes. The first proof did not come from Raymond or Brandon. It arrived as an email notification while I was standing over the stove reheating leftovers. The subject line mentioned the homeowner association for my street, and for a second I assumed it was another note about trash pickup or lawn rules. Instead, it was a short, polite message asking me to confirm whether anyone else in my family shared ownership of my unit, and whether I had requested that another name be added to their records. Reading it, I felt that buzzing in my chest flare back to life. Someone was already trying to treat my home like a piece of shared family property on paper, as if my signature and my mortgage were just a temporary formality. I typed my reply carefully, stated that I was the sole owner, and hit send with my heart pounding. I still did not know exactly what my dad was planning, but I knew one thing for sure. He was not finished. There was a certain hour of the evening when the duplex settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind that usually calmed me after long work days. That night, the calm barely lasted a few minutes. I had just stepped out to pick up groceries when my phone lit up with a notification from the smart doorbell. I almost ignored it out of habit, assuming it was a delivery or someone turning around in the driveway. But the preview image froze me mid-step. 3 figures stood in front of my door. My thumb hovered over the screen before I finally tapped to open the live view. The sight made my stomach drop so hard I felt dizzy. My dad was standing on the small concrete step I had repainted only months earlier. Brandon was beside him, posture impatient, shifting his weight like he had somewhere more important to be. And between them was a man holding a toolbox, glancing at my lock as if he were assessing a job he had already agreed to start. For a few seconds, I could not even process the scene. The idea that they were actually there, outside my home, while I wasn't inside to stop them, sent a jolt of panic straight through me. I pressed the phone closer to my face, trying to catch every detail. Their expressions, the layout of their stance, the man reaching toward the handle as if this was a routine call. It hit me in a slow, sickening wave. Someone had convinced a locksmith to come to my address. Someone had told him they had the right to open my door. My breath came out uneven as I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. The groceries lay forgotten on the passenger side while I tried to steady my hands enough to start the engine. I kept the live feed open by propping the phone against the dashboard. Every time the man shifted his tools, my pulse spiked. I wanted to call a friend, but I knew there was no time. I needed to get home. I needed to get there before anyone touched the lock I had paid for, before anyone stepped into the place I had fought to call mine. The drive back felt longer than it should have. Every red light felt like a taunt, stretching the seconds in ways I could barely stand. I replayed the image in my mind. My dad on my porch like someone enforcing a claim, Brandon hovering behind him like a shadow that refused to be shaken off. There was no universe where this was a misunderstanding. No version of reality where a parent and sibling simply showed up with a locksmith out of concern or confusion. This required intention, planning, a willingness to cross a boundary so blatant that even the memory of it made my chest tighten. Turning onto my street brought a flash of adrenaline sharp enough to clear every other thought. My driveway came into view, and the silhouettes were still there, exactly where the camera had captured them. Their shapes shifted as they noticed my car approaching, and the man with the toolbox stepped back slightly, uncertain now, as though the situation finally seemed less routine. My hands trembled as I parked, but there was no hesitation in me anymore. Seeing them on my doorstep like that pulled something fierce and protective to the surface. This was my home. My name was the one on every document. I had fought for this place piece by piece, paycheck by paycheck. Whatever my family believed they were entitled to had no place on that porch. I stepped out of the car with a clarity I had not felt in weeks. The night air was colder than I expected, brushing against my skin as if reminding me to stay grounded, to stay present. Each step up the driveway made the situation sharper, more real, impossible to cushion with excuses. I wasn't sure what I would say when I reached them. I only knew one truth pulsing hard and steady at the center of my chest. Whatever line my family had been inching toward, tonight, they had finally crossed it. By the time I stepped back inside my duplex that night, the adrenaline had drained into something heavier and colder. The walls looked the same, the lights I had left on still glowed, but the feeling of safety I usually had here was gone. My hands were still unsteady as I set my keys on the counter. I could not shake the image of a stranger standing inches from drilling into my lock. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I pulled out the business card the locksmith had handed me. The print was smudged in one corner, probably from the way I gripped it earlier, but the company name was clear. The rational part of me wanted to breathe. Calm down. Wait until morning. The part of me that had watched my father stand on my porch like he owned it refused to let this slide. I dialed the number before I could second-guess myself. The hold music barely lasted a few seconds before someone picked up. Explaining what happened felt strange at first. Using measured words, laying out the details in a way that sounded almost clinical. But beneath every sentence was the weight of something personal. I told them a technician nearly opened my door without confirming ownership. I told them a man had stood beside him, insisting he had the authority to get inside. On the other end, the tone shifted as soon as they realized what their employee had almost done. The apology came quickly, followed by promises to review policy and address the issue internally. None of it gave me back the hour of panic I had just lived through, but it was something. When I ended the call, the house felt too quiet again. Reaching for my phone a second time was easier. Elise had texted earlier asking how the housewarming dinner went. The message still sat unread at the top of my screen. I tapped her name and waited. When she picked up, I didn't even know where to start. The words came out in fragments. My dad, Brandon, the locksmith, the camera. And for a moment, hearing my own voice tremble made everything feel even more real. Elise didn't interrupt. She let me spill everything, and the disbelief in her breathing said enough. When she finally spoke, her frustration came through sharp and protective. She told me this had gone too far, that this wasn't just a family argument anymore. She reminded me that having boundaries didn't make me cruel. And then she told me, in the same calm tone she used whenever she wanted me to take her seriously, that I needed to contact someone who understood situations like this from a legal standpoint. Her certainty pushed something into place inside me. I opened the contacts list where I had saved Ethan Ward's number from months before. A friend had recommended him back when I first closed on the duplex, telling me he was the kind of attorney who explained things clearly and never made clients feel foolish for asking basic questions. I had never expected to call him for anything related to my family. The line connected after a few rings. As soon as I said my name, my voice steadied, almost out of necessity. I told him everything I could remember in a single coherent chain. The pressure from my dad, the silence after the confrontation, the strange questions directed to the homeowner association, the unexpected appearance of a locksmith at my door. While I spoke, I could almost hear the way he sorted the information, building a picture piece by piece. He didn't react with shock. Instead, he responded the way someone does when they've seen similar situations before. He asked for the footage from my smart doorbell. He asked for copies of the emails and the details the locksmith company provided. He explained what documentation mattered and what steps would protect me if the situation escalated further. Then he said something that settled deep in my chest. This was the moment to create a record. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because my father and brother had shown they were willing to cross a line most people never approach. Having evidence wasn't petty. It was necessary. After hanging up, I sat still for a long time, letting the quiet stretch around me. The house wasn't comforting yet, but at least I felt anchored. I had taken the first steps. The fear was still there, but it had shifted into something steadier, something that looked a little like resolve. Morning light always felt softer in East Austin, but that day it barely registered. I had slept lightly, waking every hour with the sense that something in my world had tilted, and ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. By the time the sun rose, the decision was already made. Pretending things were normal had only encouraged my dad and brother to push further. It was time to document what they had started. The police station wasn't far from my duplex, but the drive felt heavier than usual. The building looked plain, almost unimpressive, but walking toward it carried a weight I didn't expect. Part of me wanted to turn around, to cling to the idea that families eventually settle things on their own. Another part of me, the part still shaken by the memory of that locksmith standing on my porch, knew that belief had cost me more than I ever admitted. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed quietly while I waited. I held my phone in both hands, the screen dimmed but ready. The videos, the emails, and the timeline had been arranged neatly the night before. Being prepared didn't make this easier, but it kept my breathing steady. When someone finally called me forward, I repeated everything in the same calm order I had used with Ethan. Each detail felt heavier when spoken out loud, as if hearing them gave them a sharper edge. Showing the footage forced me to relive the moment again. My dad's posture, Brandon's impatience, the locksmith adjusting his tools. The officer watched without judgment, taking notes with the kind of concentration that made the room feel smaller. They asked a few clarifying questions, simple ones, but each answer added another layer to the report. It surprised me how procedural the process felt. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. Just facts being arranged into something official, something I could lean on if this escalated further. When the officer finally said they would file it as an attempted unlawful entry, the words settled inside me with a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I hadn't wanted it to come to this, but it had. Walking back to my car felt surreal. The quiet outside the station was different from the silence inside my duplex. This silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like a boundary. Like something had finally been drawn in a place my dad could no longer step over without consequences. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, letting the weight of the morning settle. My phone buzzed before I even started the engine. The preview on the screen showed my brother's name first. The message sounded exactly like him, shaped by the same entitlement that had carried him through his adult life. Before I could finish reading it, another notification appeared. This one from my dad. Then another. And another. They stacked one after another in a way that made the car feel smaller, the air thicker. Scrolling through them was like stepping into a familiar storm. There was disappointment disguised as concern. There was anger masked as moral authority. And woven through it all was the same message I had heard all my life. I was wrong for protecting myself. Wrong for not bending. Wrong for refusing to carry the weight of someone else's choices. What struck me most was how none of the messages mentioned what actually happened. Not one acknowledged the locksmith, the questions about my property, or the attempt to enter my home without permission. Instead, everything centered around loyalty, family, and the idea that I had broken something sacred by refusing to let them rewrite the rules. Sitting there, I felt something shift. Their words didn't land the way they used to. Instead of guilt, there was clarity. Instead of doubt, there was a kind of quiet resolve. I had spent years absorbing their expectations, shaping myself around their needs, convincing myself that choosing peace meant staying silent. Now, peace looked different. It looked like documentation. It looked like boundaries. It looked like not letting fear or obligation push me back into old patterns. By the time I pulled out of the parking lot, the stream of messages still hadn't stopped. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't tempted to respond. Their anger no longer felt like a threat, just proof that drawing a line had been the right choice. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur, but as the sky edged toward dusk, something inside the house shifted. The air felt thicker, as if the quiet carried a warning I hadn't fully noticed yet. I had tried to distract myself by sorting old mail, watering the small plants lined on my windowsill, anything to keep my hands busy. But the weight of the messages from earlier still lingered like static in the background. When I heard the distant sound of a car slowing near my driveway, I didn't move right away. Attention collected across my shoulders the way it always had when I sensed trouble approaching long before it arrived. I stepped toward the front window carefully, almost hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. The familiar shape of my dad's car sat at the curb, engine quiet, headlights dim. There was no hesitation in the way he got out, no pause to consider whether he was welcome. Watching him walk up the path I repainted last spring brought back years of memories, most of them shaped by his certainty that he always knew better, always deserved the final say. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to slow the rush of thoughts piling through my mind. I didn't owe him anything. I knew that now. Still, seeing him stride toward my door with the same hardened expression he used whenever he believed he held the moral high ground stirred something sharp in my chest. I braced myself before opening the door. The moment he stepped inside, the energy in the room changed. He carried a tension that filled the space before his presence did, a simmering frustration he didn't bother hiding. My heartbeat drummed against my ribs, but not from fear. It was something steadier, something that almost felt like finality. I could sense where this was heading, long before either of us took another step. I watched him look around the living room as though searching for proof that I hadn't earned it. That old flicker of resentment, one I spent years swallowing, surfaced unexpectedly, reminding me just how long I had accepted less than the bare minimum from him. This house had taken years of sacrifice. I had worked shifts that left me exhausted, saved every cent I could, and handled every setback without asking for anything. Yet he walked across my floor as if each tile belonged to him by default. Part of me wondered if he expected me to crumble the way I always used to shrink beneath his disappointment. The thought made my pulse steady in a way I didn't expect. I was done shrinking. The quiet strength that had carried me through the last few days rose slowly, filling the space where doubt used to live. His presence filled the room with pressure, but it didn't push me the way it once did. Every memory of being overlooked, dismissed, or compared to Brandon fueled a clarity I couldn't ignore anymore. I understood now that I wasn't dealing with a moment of anger, but a pattern that stretched back years. One I had finally interrupted by refusing to hand over the life I built. As he moved closer, that certainty planted itself deeper. Whatever he intended to say would not change what had already been set in motion. He had crossed a boundary that could not be patched with guilt or authority, and the fear of disappointing him no longer held any power over me. The moment he finally turned away, the tension in the room shifted again. Watching him walk out the front door carried a strange finality, like a chapter closing without ceremony. He didn't look back, but he didn't need to. The distance between us wasn't created today. It had been building for years. Today only exposed it. When the door clicked shut behind him, a quiet settled through the duplex that felt different from before. Not an emptiness, not regret, something closer to relief. A weight loosening, a space clearing. For the first time, I understood that setting boundaries didn't create loss. It just revealed who was willing to respect them. I stood in the center of my living room, surrounded by the life I built, and finally let the realization settle. This house wasn't the battle. It was the line I refused to let anyone cross again. The quiet that settled in the house later that evening felt different from any quiet I had known before. It wasn't heavy or tense or uncertain. It carried a clarity I hadn't realized I was desperate for. I could move through my own space without bracing for another intrusion or another demand disguised as family duty. For the first time in months, maybe years. The air inside my duplex felt like it belonged to me. Not long after sunrise the next morning, my phone lit up with an email from Ethan. The message was direct and thorough, the kind of clarity I needed. He explained that the report I filed had already been logged and flagged because of the attempted entry. He also told me something I had not expected to feel relief over. Any additional attempts to approach my property without permission would be treated as a repeat offense, not a misunderstanding. That single sentence felt like a shield being quietly placed between me and everything I had just gone through. Attached to the email was a second document, a summary of options for protecting my estate from interference. Seeing my own name in legal print drove home just how close my father had come to crossing a line most people never imagine crossing. I signed what needed to be signed and sent it back without hesitation. Every keystroke felt like reclaiming something I had been told my entire life not to fight for. Later that week, another update arrived, this time from the homeowner association. They had investigated the earlier inquiry made about my property and recorded the findings formally. Their internal notes stated that no other family member had legal grounds to make claims or requests regarding my home. That record would stay attached to my address permanently. It was a small detail, but the permanence of it mattered. It meant I didn't have to worry about things shifting quietly in the background. The consequences for my father and brother didn't take long to surface. Word travels quickly in neighborhoods where people pay attention. Neighbors had seen the locksmith situation unfold, and the footage I submitted left little room for interpretation. When the police department followed up with them, the conversations did not stay private. Professionally, the timing could not have been worse for my dad. He had been part of a community organization for years, and once people understood what he had attempted, the support he was used to receiving faded almost overnight. His reputation, something he valued more than anything, crumbled in ways I never expected to witness. Brandon faced his own fallout. The same people who had always loaned him money or offered him small jobs suddenly kept their distance. Nobody wanted to get tangled in a situation involving police reports and property disputes. The world he had floated through so easily became a world full of locked doors. He was forced to sit with the reality that the safety net he believed would always be beneath him was gone. As for me, life moved forward with a calm steadiness I didn't trust at first. I rearranged some furniture, went back to work, spent quiet evenings on the small patio behind my duplex without checking the driveway every few minutes. The absence of chaos felt unfamiliar, almost delicate, but I learned to let it settle. I learned to call the silence peace instead of waiting for it to break. Looking back, the thing that stays with me most is how long I convinced myself endurance was the same thing as loyalty, that sacrificing stability and comfort for people who never considered my needs was somehow noble. I know better now. Boundaries are not walls. They are doorways you choose who to let through. And choosing yourself is not a betrayal. It is a form of protection. If anyone takes anything from what happened to me, I hope it is this. Family does not excuse harm, and love does not require surrender. Sometimes, the most honest act of courage is refusing to shrink for people who expect you to make yourself small. And sometimes, freedom is not gained by running away, but by standing still and saying, finally and fully, this ends here.